All right, this is lecture 2 for the progressive era. Today we're going to talk about who these progressives were and mainly focusing on muckrakers and individuals who wanted to help change the society that we were living in and make things better for the poor and the average people. So first we're going to talk about who these progressives were. They're the middle class, young professionals, people that had an education, things that they had learned in college or in other schooling that could help them, you know, to help society. They wanted to be able to fix the problems that we had talked about during the Gilded Age, and they believed that education was the cure-all. So obviously, the idea of child labor is going to be an issue that we're going to talk about, and the fact that if you don't get an education, you're not going to get out of the factory job. You're not going to be able to become a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, anything like that if you don't get educated. So they wanted to apply the principles they learned in school to fix society. Okay, one of the huge groups of progressives were the Muckrakers, and we've talked about the Muckrakers already. Muckrakers, the term is kind of gross. It's like raking at the muck, but that's really what they're doing. They're looking at these problems. They're bringing it to the forefront. They're journalists. They're writers. They're authors. They're photographers. They're people that wanted to bring these things to the surface. A lot of times, like as I talked about the Gilded Age, we didn't know that things were so bad. We knew that there were some issues, but we didn't understand the depth of these issues. So they're the ones that were able to bring these to the surface and bring it out to the mass culture. So the first muckraker we're going to talk about, her name is Jane Addams. She's known as a mother of social work. She's not as much a muckraker as far as like an author, a publisher, a journalist, as she was someone that understood what was going on. Someone understood the poverty in the cities, and she wanted to fix it. And she took it upon herself to start helping the poor through something called a settlement house. And the first one that she created was called the Hull House, and it was an institution aimed at providing social and educational opportunities for working class people. She wanted to help people that didn't have a place to live, a place to, or a job or anything like that. She wanted to help these people. And it's important to know that this isn't like a welfare program. This is not like free housing. This was like get on your feet, stay here for a couple of nights, and then you can move out and on your own. And she would help you get a job, help you get a place to live. So it wasn't like, here, I'm going to give you this. It's just providing like a springboard for something better. Okay. So some of the other things that she did was she taught people history and the arts, and then taught them how to work in specific jobs that were viable to the economy. So things that we needed to have in our economy. So if you could do jobs that were necessary, then they had something to offer society. The next person is Ida Tarbell. She wrote a book called The History of the Standard Oil Company. And we all know Standard Oil was headed by John Rockefeller. And what she did is she basically talks about how like the Standard Oil Company used like strong arm tactics against its rivals. So they're trying to beat out the rivals. They're trying to undersell everyone. They're buying out their corporations, and she just thinks it's not like fair competition and fair tactics. So she actually exposes these factors about the Standard Oil Company. And this is really the first kind of corporate coverage of its time, where she's the first one to really call out these big companies and really research them and go in depth about their practices and expose those practices to the people, so they know that, oh wow, Rockefeller is doing all these really bad things in order to become rich, and it's a way that to kind of springboard again the idea of fixing that by going on and creating legislation that will help to defeat them. All right, the next person is Jacob Riis. We've talked about Jacob Riis. You've seen a lot of Jacob Riis's pictures in the past. He wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives. We looked at all those pictures from Jacob Riis in the very, very beginning of the Gilded Age. And he just is kind of showing what life is like in New York City and how there's a really lot of poor people, and showed the working conditions. He showed factories, shows child labor and kids here. Him and Lewis Hine really were kind of working hand in hand to show the working conditions and living conditions of the lower class. And the important thing about this is it's kind of like you could kind of relate it back to Harriet Beecher Stowe's book Uncle Tom's Cabin, where she's talking about the fact that people in the North didn't really know what was going on in the South as far as slavery goes. Same sort of thing. The upper middle class and the upper classes didn't really understand what was going on, and he kind of blamed like upper class, the apathy of the upper class, which means they don't really care for the poor conditions in the city. But when they see these pictures, they understand that maybe they do need to care and do something about it. So It's a good book. It was kind of like a picture book um, to show and visually show people what was wrong with our society. Okay, and then the last guy we're going to talk about is Upton Sinclair. He wrote the book called The Jungle. Okay, and Upton Sinclair intended this book to be the inferno of exploitation of the typical American factory worker at the turn of the 20th century. So he was going into these meatpacking plants trying to show how bad the working conditions were and how people are getting injured. I'm not going to go into too much detail today because you're going to read some of it in class, but talking about like fingernails being ripped out and thumbs being cut off and kind of like really disgusting stuff. And the working conditions were terrible. These people were being injured and they're just kind of thrown to the side. That's what he was aiming for. But the thing is that when he wrote all these things about like dead mice being dropped into vats and mouse poop being thrown in with the meat and rotten meat being used and smelly pigs and all these things, people were like not as much concerned about the people that were being hurt, but more concerned about like the meat that they were now consuming, knowing that it was like full of things that should not be eaten, and even full of like human flesh. So it's kind of like almost a version of cannibalism. So the book intends to do one thing, it actually goes out and does another. They actually go out and they start pushing for cleaner food and cleaner drugs. And the Pure Food and Drug Act it creates a set of standards for food that we still have, like the FDA that we have today, that is going to show what meat should be like, and we have to inspect it and make sure that it's good and ready to eat and ready for human consumption. So it's kind of funny that it was intended for one thing but actually did the other, or did something else. All right, and that's it for the lecture real quick today. I hope you enjoyed the Muckrakers, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Have a good one.